Hello, Next.js Conf, and happy early Halloween. My name is Cassidy Williams, and I'm so excited to be chatting with you today. Today, we're going to be talking about choosing our own adventures in Next.js, and I can't wait to tell you a little bit more about it. I had a ton of fun building out this project. Like I mentioned earlier, my name is Cassidy, and if you'd like to find me on the internet, my handle is Cassidoo on GitHub, on Twitter, all over the place. And I'm actually here with my company, Netlify. Netlify is a sponsor of this event, and you'll be able to go chat with some of my coworkers at the booth afterwards, and I'll be there too. And we have a bunch of new features coming out this week and in the coming weeks, and if you'd like to go check out a webinar or get to know some of the people there, or hey, if you want to go to the recruiting booth and check out what jobs we have, we would love to have you. So head over to the Netlify channels on Discord after the event. But all that being said, we're talking about adventures here. Now, it's early Halloween, and so I wanted to do something kind of spooky and something kind of creative. So that leads to adventures. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was little, I loved the concept of choose your own adventure books. I thought they were the coolest thing. And if you haven't seen those before, basically, Choose Your Own Adventure books had multiple endings. You can see on this cover here, choose from 28 endings. And from every page in the book, you had a decision to make. And they would say, okay, well, if you want to fight with these people, go to this page. Or if you want to maintain the peace, go to this page. And so you kind of got to journey through this book and have all kinds of different endings happen. And it was so fun. I felt creative, even though someone had already written it for me. I just thought it was the coolest thing. So, when I was thinking about this talk, I thought, I really want to build one of these. I think making a choose your own adventure would be so cool. So, first things first, it came down to figuring out what kind of data structure I wanted to use for building this kind of choose your own adventure, because there's a lot of different options, and the first thing that came to mind was maybe a linked list. It's kind of linear, but it's not linear. It's not linear in any way because you're kind of jumping around a little bit. And so the next thing I thought was trees. Trees have branches and you can go and make different choices. If you look at this diagram here, you might have the story starting in a certain part. And if you do the one choice, then you can go to too many choices. And then you have so many choices, so little time. Or if you go with another choice, this could lead to this or the other one could lead to that. And you can kind of go where you want to go in that regard. But this is where it gets a little bit more complex. Choose your own adventure stories aren't always just in one direction. Sometimes paths converge. Sometimes you might have to start all over again or navigate a different way. It's kind of like a maze in a story. And so a tree, as cool as it is, branches don't converge in a tree. And so that got me to thinking about graphs. When you have a graph, you have all these same choices, except you can go any which way you want in that graph and kind of just bounce around between all the different nodes, all the different choices, and that's how you navigate. That being said, though, we want our story to have kind of a specific path. We don't want people to kind of just be hitting undo all the time or being able to just jump to any path they want to just because they happen to be connected. So we needed to be a little bit more specific. We needed to make a directed graph. And a directed graph looks almost exactly the same, except it has arrows. It's kind of combining the best of both worlds in terms of trees and in terms of undirected graphs. You have a direction that you're going in, but you can have a little bit of a loop. Notice how we have that story start, and then if you do one choice, so many choices, then you can do another choice, and we're kind of going back up where there's a little loop there, and you can start all the way back at the beginning. So, an undirected graph. That was the data structure that we had to use to make this choose your own adventure. Now, to actually navigate it, I thought we could use state machines. And state machines are basically a way to kind of navigate these different nodes, where if we look at our diagram again, you could say, okay, with story start, we are in the state of story start. And then we need to navigate to one choice or another choice and go that way, then to so many choices. Then from so many choices, we can go to all of these different states. And so it's a state machine you're never in multiple states at once. You're always in one spot. And so really, it's a state machine, but it is more specifically a user input driven state machine. And so that's what we had to implement to be able to get to the choose your own adventure set. So we've gotten to that point. Now we have to actually pick tools that will allow us to actually build one of these. And so when state machines come into mind, I admit the first library that comes to my mind is XState. XState is an awesome state machine library. It's built on top of just the concept of reducers and being able to make really nice state machines that can run your applications. And state machines in XState work really well with React. And if it works well with React, it works well with Next.js. So you're combining XState and React, and Next.js all together. So in addition to having this state machine being run by Next.js and React and the users playing around with that, I wanted to add a little bit more customization on top of that. And another thing that I like, in addition to choose your own adventure stories, are mad-libs. And I was thinking, what if we had a crowdsourced mad-lib choose your own adventure story? Oh my goodness, it's getting exciting. So the next technology I decided to bring in was Netlify Forms. Now, if you haven't used those before, it's honestly a glorified HTML form, except if you add a data attribute that says Netlify that's true, then Netlify will automatically detect that and then take in your inputs right away. And then it toggles a function, which brings me to Netlify functions. And so as you submit something or a user submits something in a Netlify form, it toggles a function. And then that function would push the user data to a database. And for this project, I used Hasura. And so in React and Next.js, we have a state machine. That state machine is going to be getting data from Hasura, which is coming from a Netlify function, which is being triggered by a Netlify form. And on top of all of this, it is Halloween. We need a spooky brain. So all these powers combined, and we have a demo. And I'm so excited to talk with you about this demo because, my goodness, it was kind of a journey to build it. And there's a lot of cool things that I want to show you, and hopefully we don't run out of too much time before I get to. So let's get started. Now, the first thing that I want to show you right here is actually a really cool feature of XState. And it's under statecharts.io. There's an inspector package that you can use. And so I was able to create my state machine in JavaScript and have all kinds of different states set up and have a sequence set up. And it generates this nice little graph for me. And so you can see that it's a directed graph. And I could say, okay, there's the start of the story. And then when we go to snack time, that means we've hit snack time. And then we can click eat an apple, and eat an apple will go to the end, and that's a little spoiler for our story, and then make you restart. And then if you eat candy, that'll mean that the doorbell is ringing. And so when you ring the doorbell, that means that you can either ignore the kids at the door or answer the door. And then you have all of these different choices in our spooky little story here. And it was really nice to be able to visualize this before I actually, dove in and added my own styling and my own navigation to the application. So this part was really cool. And so after gathering all of this and putting it just into, it's honestly just a really giant JavaScript object, I put that into the project. And so I'm going to pull up my Next.js application right here so you can check it out. Now that JavaScript object that I told you about, I put it in my statemachine.js. And the way I kind of structured it out might be a little bit confusing, so bear with me for a second. I kind of had different levels of the story. So the first one is just the introduction where you have the start. Then I only give the user one choice to go to snack time. And then after that is where the choices happen. Then there's the first levels of stories, and that's where it's kind of similar to a tree. And then there's the second level, then the third level. So we're kind of branching out a little bit, and then some of these levels point back to other ones in here. And so when you actually look at the story machine, it names each of the states based on these objects that I have up here. And then I have the actual stories implemented right here. And you can see I've got a name, and I've got pronouns, and I got a smell. One of the things that I added was your character's favorite smell. I thought it'd be an interesting fun thing to add. It's probably dumb, but I don't care. So anyway, we add that to our state machine. And basically, what's cool about XState is that you define your state, you define any story or anything you want in the meta of that state, and then you can do on, and on just points to the other choices that you can have. And as you build this out, you get a nice, beautiful graph that you can look at to see how it's actually structured, to see if it makes sense visually. Now, I've talked a lot about code. Let me actually show you what the application looks like really quick. Okay, so we have our application. It's a little bit spooky. I added some fun little CSS in there. It's a lonely, code-filled night. Now, the user has two options to either get spooky and get right into the story, or to contribute a character. Let's start with the state machine side of things so you can kind of see how it works in the application itself. So we're going to get spooky. Once upon a time, there was a developer named Zombie who was working very late at night. Very late at night on Halloween. It's snack time. Zombie decided to take a break to go get a snack. He went to the kitchen and couldn't decide what to eat. Zombie could eat an apple, or Zombie could eat some candy. Let's eat some candy. He munched on the candy, enjoying a delightful thought of getting a cavity someday. But then the doorbell rang. Trick or treat echoed outside. What do you want to do? Should we ignore the kids or answer the door? I think we're going to answer the door. He opened the front door, but there was nobody there. It was spooky, but it was probably good because his stomach had the last of the candy, because we ate all that candy. Well, let's just do one more choice. Ask if anyone's out there. He called out into the night, "Who's there?" Suddenly a werewolf comes up and says, "Have you heard of TypeScript?" and eats him. The end. And that is our silly story. And there's more branches in there, but this is high level how the application works. Then you can start over and go back to the beginning of our story. It's kind of fun, right? Now, if you go home, you noticed our character was named Zombie. That is actually a contribution from the Netlify form here. In this form, you can type in a character name, you can put in your character's pronouns, you can put in their favorite smell. The smell is in the story, I promise. And then you can put in your email as well. I put that in for verification purposes. And then when you send that toggles a function. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about that side of the application as well. Okay, so there is a component for the character form here. And as you can see, this truly is just an HTML form. There's nothing particularly fancy about it, except right here, data Netlify is true. When Netlify detects this data Netlify is true, it automatically captures your form submissions that are passed in. Let's just say we want to use my coworker Lindsay in here. Lindsay, if you're watching, I'm not sorry. Okay, we're doing my character Lindsay. Her pronouns are she, her. Her favorite smell? Success. And put an email in there. Okay, we have hit that submission. Now, if I were to go home and then refresh the page here, we can see that Lindsay has been submitted. And so if I were to go over to Hasura, where my function is run, I can go over to characters and look at that, Lindsay, success, female pronouns. Oh my gosh, it's so exciting. Okay, so now that we have done that, that means in our adventure story, it's random. I'd have to check. But hey, look at that. We have a developer named Lindsay. And then if I were to say that Lindsay decided to take a break to get a snack, notice how it's she and not he. It's different from Zombie. She couldn't decide what to eat. She ate an apple and, oh, she paused. She felt funny. Turns out it was poisoned and her work was never finished. With that, her last words were, "I wish I committed early and often in my repositories." I'm sorry, Lindsay. You're dead. Anyway, and so it's kind of fun. We get to kind of crowdsource the story and add a bunch of options in there and add characters and add little personalities, and anybody can do this. It's kind of fun. If you'd like to add stuff to the story yourself, I'll post the link in there. And if you'd like to check out the actual function itself, I have a functions folder. And in submission created, this is kind of a magic name, submission created.js. If Netlify sees that submission created JavaScript file, then it knows that it's because a form submission has happened on the site. have this mutation here in GraphQL, and when we call that mutation, then it's adding this character to Hasura, and that adds it to our database. It's actually fairly straightforward. And then we have a getCharacter.js, and that is just a query to Hasura that pulls in all of the different characters, and then we get a random character from that. And that is how the two functions work. We push it to the database, and we pull it from the database and randomize it a little bit. It's kind of fun, right? Okay, so now that we have these functions in place and we have our state machine in place, I'll show you some of the other parts of the code base that were kind of interesting to put together, and I had such a fun time with. So first of all, in this state machine, you might notice that we have the name, pronouns, and the smell coming for the character. Pronouns, there's a lot of them, if you're, depending on what you use. And I ended up making a bunch of different functions so that way you could generate personal pronouns, generate possessive pronouns, reflexive pronouns, so that inside of the state machine itself, depending on what the pronouns are, you could pass in the fem, masc, or NB, and then generate the different pronouns. And that just gets plopped into the story, and it's a string. It's really just a bunch of glorified switch statements, but it was kind of an interesting thing that I hadn't really considered until I decided to put it together. Now, for actually using this state machine and navigating between the pages, I have a nice, interesting one. And the name of this file is in brackets ... story. So it's a spread of story in here. And that is because as you navigate in the page, and if I were to do snack time and then eat some candy and ignore the kids, for example, the URL on the site actually changes. So it does /start, then snack time, eat some candy, ignore the kids. And so you can kind of see what your path has been through the story just based on the URL. And so in order to actually accomplish that, what I did was I took the actual story value from the state machine, and then I also checked if there were any next events in that state machine that would say, okay, if there's events coming up, we'll take each of those and put a button side by side. And as you do that, we have this router as path right here. And so you folks know Next.js. Next router allows you to get the current path and navigate with it if you don't want to use link tags. And so I got the current path and just added the next event to it every single time so you could kind of see what was happening in there. And then I also did something a little bit funky, but it got the job done, where if someone were to, for whatever reason, just happen to get rid of one of the parts of the URL and it didn't match up with the state, I was able to just kind of start them over and start them completely fresh so that they were never in a funky state where the URL wasn't working entirely properly. Now there is one last thing I'd like to show off, and that is the package Next.on-netlify. Next.on-netlify is a package that we've been working on, and I'm so excited to show it off to you. And it is a package that allows you to use some of the server-side rendering parts of Next.js with Netlify functions. And so Netlify functions are the ones that actually run routes that you wouldn't normally get to use if you were just using a plain static site on Netlify. And to install it, it's actually pretty straightforward, and I'll just show you what I did in my code here. I added next-on-netlify to my package.json. I added my netlify.toml right here, and then I made sure that my next config was serverless. Those 3 steps, and that had the package installed. And I admit I kind of wanted to experiment with preview mode and forms and see if I could kind of preview what a character would look like in the story, but got a little bit ahead of myself. This is a demo. We gotta keep moving. But anyway, that is how I built this Choose Your Own Adventure story. And if you'd like to add your own submissions and try it out yourself, you can go to next-adventure.netlify.app and you can play around with it and have a good time with it. I personally had a really fun time building this application, and I learned a lot too. Let's talk about what we learned. So, first of all, fundamental CS concepts are actually good to know. Who knew? I personally do have a CS degree, but I know not a lot of people out there do. And knowing the difference between trees and graphs and linked lists and these kinds of data structures, it's good to know because it will help you kind of build applications a little bit smarter than you might not usually have. Using tools also that are flexible and only prescriptive in small ways is empowering. For example, when I was using XState, it had a few certain rules that I had to follow to make sure that I had the right structure in place, but otherwise, it's very free-flowing and I can kind of build with it what I want and it doesn't really tell me what to do. And honestly, that's what I like about Next.js as well. As long as you have your page components in the pages directory and organize things well, you can kind of roam free with it and have a really good time. And so learning how to use those tools and picking out those tools that are really good for that kind of flexibility with certain rules that kind of keep you safe, those kind of guardrails, it's really important. And then, of course, I'm really good at writing spooky stories, right? Right? Yeah. Anyway, I hope you all have a lovely Halloween. I hope you all enjoyed this talk. I had so much fun giving it. And if you would like to chat with us a little bit more, I'm going to be in the Q&A in Discord right after this event and right after this talk. I am so grateful for you. Thank you so much for being on this spooky adventure with me, and I hope you have a great one. Enjoy the rest of the conference.